So let's get right into it. We're going to try and answer a question that seems simple, but trust me, it's one of the biggest debates in the entire field. What is applied linguistics? And this isn't just some dusty academic question. Oh no, this is a field that really impacts everything, from how you learn a new language in a classroom to how doctors and patients talk to each other, and even how justice plays out in a courtroom. We're going to peel back all the layers of this fascinating field together.
I love starting with this quote from Chekhov because, really, it gets to the absolute heart of how applied linguists think. See, the goal isn't always about finding some single perfect solution. Not at all. The real power is in looking closely, in analyzing, and in correctly framing the problem in the first place. It's all about understanding that complex, messy web of things going on in any real-world situation that involves language. You've got to get the diagnosis right before you can even start thinking about a cure.
And that brings us right back to the big question, doesn't it? So what is it? Well, here's the fun part. If you put 10 of the top applied linguists in a room and asked for a definition, you'd probably get 10 different answers. But you know what? That's not a weakness. It's actually a sign of a field that's alive, that's growing and changing. It's kind of like a mystery we get to solve, and we're going to follow all the clues.
To figure this all out, we've got a roadmap. First, we'll look at those tricky definitions that make this whole thing a puzzle. Then, we'll explore the two main ways scholars try to make sense of the field. We're going to dive into a big debate called source versus target, then we'll see what applied linguists actually do with some real-world examples. We'll unpack the difference between research and development, and finally, we'll pull all the evidence together and reach our verdict.
Okay, so our investigation has to start where any good investigation does, with the evidence we already have. In our case, that's the definitions people have come up with. And right away, we find that our clues are pointing in all sorts of different directions. This is going to be a tough case to crack.
So look at this. This slide really shows you the fundamental split in how people see the field. On one side, you've got thinkers like Kaplan, Whittleson, and Corder. They basically see the field as linguistics applied. For them, you start with the science of linguistics, all the theories about grammar and sounds and sentence structure, and you apply it to solve problems. Corder's point is pretty straightforward. You can't apply a science you don't have, right? But then, on the other side, you've got this much broader, more critical view from people like Rampton and Pennycook. They argue that the field is less about applying abstract rules and way more about getting into complex human issues where language is key, things like social justice, identity, power. This isn't just some small disagreement, folks. It's a huge debate about where the field's loyalty lies. Is it to an academic discipline, or is it to the social problems it's trying to help solve?
With a divide that deep, it's really no surprise that scholars came up with two totally different strategies for trying to define the field. You can think of them as two competing investigative philosophies for cracking our case.
Okay, so the big split here is between a theoretical approach and a practical one. The dictionary approach, which guys like Whittleson really champion, is all about finding a clean, stable theoretical center. It says applied linguistics has to have a clear identity, and that identity is its job as the middleman between linguistic theory and real-world language problems. The ostensive approach, on the other hand, says something completely different. It's like, hey, don't sweat the perfect definition. The field is what applied linguists do. It's a dynamic, just look around you kind of definition that sees the field as this practical coalition of interests, from language teaching and speech pathology to translation. So one path is looking for a timeless, unified identity, while the other just embraces a fluid identity that's defined by what it does in the real world.
Let's dig into the next layer of our investigation, which builds right on top of this tension. It's another classic debate that helps us understand the field's boundaries. Should we define applied linguistics by the knowledge it comes from, its source, or by the problems it's trying to solve, its target?
And this just lays out the dilemma perfectly. I mean, if we define the field by its source, we hit a wall pretty fast. Is it just applying linguistics? Pretty much everyone agrees that's way too narrow. To get how a kid learns a second language, you need psychology. To understand why people misunderstand each other at work, you need sociology. So the source has to be multidisciplinary. But if we define it by its target, we've got another problem. Does it tackle any problem that involves language? Well, that would make it the science of, well, everything. And that's why a lot of scholars argue for a more focused target, zeroing in on a core set of problems, like second language acquisition or language teaching, that give the field a kind of practical center.
All right, enough of the abstract stuff. To really get what this field is all about, we have to move from the theories about it to the work it actually produces. Let's go visit the scene of the action and see what applied linguists are really doing out there.
A fantastic place to start is the modern, multicultural workplace. I mean, this is a high-stakes environment where language isn't just about sharing information. It's about building relationships, negotiating power, and getting stuff done. A miscommunication here can have some serious financial and personal costs. In the workplace, applied linguists are basically communication detectives. A classic example is this 1979 film called Crosstalk, which looked at job interviews with South Asian applicants in Britain. And what it showed was that misunderstandings weren't happening because of bad grammar, but because of clashing cultural norms. For example, a British interviewer might expect you to be direct and sell yourself, while an applicant might have been raised to be more indirect and humble. An applied linguist would analyze everything, the turn-taking, the tone of voice, the use of silence, and then they design training programs to make everyone aware of these hidden cultural rules. The goal? To make communication fairer and way more effective. Okay, let's switch gears to another really personal case study. This is where the field looks at that inseparable link between the words we use and our sense of who we are, our personal, our social, and our national identities.
This quote from John Joseph just nails it. We don't just use language to talk about the world, we use it to place ourselves in the world. A really powerful example of this comes from Lebanon after its civil war. For a lot of people, choosing to speak French was a way to align with a more European Christian identity. On the other hand, choosing to speak Arabic was a statement of connection to the wider Arab and Muslim world. Applied linguists study these kinds of situations to understand how our language choices become these potent symbols of political loyalty, cultural history, and who we are as individuals.
And for our third case study, let's look at one of the most practical, high-stakes areas in the whole field: language assessment. This is all about how language tests and educational programs are designed, used, and evaluated.
The questions here are just critical. How does a university create an entrance exam that's fair to both native English speakers and students who learned it as another language? How do we know if a massive government-funded language program is actually working? Applied linguists work on this by developing tests that are reliable, so they give consistent results, and also valid, meaning they actually measure the real-world skills they're supposed to. They also dive into new ideas, like how to assess English as a lingua franca, which basically recognizes that the English used between non-native speakers has its own rules and shouldn't always be judged by some native speaker standard.
Now, running through all of these examples is one last, really crucial distinction we need to make. It's the difference between the development mode and the research mode. Or, to put it simply, it's the difference between building a specific solution to a problem right now and investigating a bigger, broader, theoretical question.
This table breaks it down so well. Let's take language planning. The development approach is a project with a very real goal: Australia's national policy on languages, designed to manage the country's multilingual resources. The research approach? That's more abstract. Einar Haugen's model isn't a plan for one country. It's a theoretical framework that explains the 4 stages: selection, codification, elaboration, acceptance, that any dialect goes through to become a standard national language. It's the same with assessment. The development side is building a working test for university admissions. The research side asks a much more fundamental question that could change all tests. Is language ability just one single thing, or is it a bunch of separate skills like reading, writing, and grammar? The research feeds the development, and the development work brings up new questions for the researchers. It's a cycle.
Okay, we've looked at the confusing definitions, we've traced the big debates, and we've seen applied linguists in action. It's time. Let's step back, put all the clues together, and deliver our final verdict on the identity of this complex and really vital field.
And here it is, our verdict. The strongest, most useful definition, first put forward by Christopher Brunfit, is that applied linguistics is the theoretical and empirical investigation of real-world problems in which language is a central issue. Now, this definition is so powerful because it basically solves all our earlier debates. It defines the field by its target, those real-world problems, but it also specifies the method, theoretical and empirical investigation. And that implies that the source of knowledge has to be multidisciplinary, because you just use whatever theories and tools you need to understand the problem. So the identity of applied linguistics isn't in some fixed set of knowledge, but in its absolute commitment to tackling the language challenges of the real world.
This Thoreau quote feels like the perfect way to wrap this up. Because for so many people in this field, the journey doesn't start with a theory in a book. It starts with an experience. A communication breakdown they saw in a hospital, a student they knew who was struggling in class, a legal contract that nobody could understand. They know the problem is real because they've seen it, they've experienced it. Applied linguistics then gives them the tools, the theories, the research methods, all of it, to systematically look at that experience, to understand it, and maybe, just maybe,
to do something about it.
So we've seen that applied linguistics isn't just another academic subject. It's a problem-solving discipline, right down to its core. It finds its whole purpose in the messy, fascinating, and sometimes urgent language problems that shape our lives. And that brings me to one last question for you. Now that you've got a map of the field, what's a real-world problem in your community, at your job, or even in your own life where language is the central issue that you would want to solve?